There is a piece of footage that investigators have studied hundreds of times. It lasts only a few seconds. The image is grainy, lit by a single porch lamp. A figure approaches the front door of a house in the Catalina Foothills, one of the quieter, more affluent neighborhoods on the north side of Tucson, Arizona. The figure is dressed entirely in black. Black mask, black gloves, a backpack, and visible at their side, what appears to be a holstered firearm. The figure reaches toward the camera, and then the feed goes dark. That was sometime in the early morning hours of February 1st, 2026. The house belonged to Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, a mother, a churchgoer, a woman who had lived in the Tucson area for more than 50 years, and who, by every account from the people who loved her, was mentally sharp, independent, and deeply connected to her community. When her family went to check on her the following day, she was gone. No sign of where she went, no confirmed sighting after that night. The doorbell camera, the one that captured the figure in black, had been physically ripped from its mount. The only traces left behind were drops of blood on the front porch, confirmed by DNA to be Nancy's. As of this recording, Nancy Guthrie has not been found. Tonight I want to walk through this case as carefully as I can. The timeline, the forensic evidence, the investigative steps, and the questions that remain unanswered. I'll tell you what authorities have confirmed, what they've officially ruled out, and where the investigation stands today. And I'll tell you what I think is worth paying attention to, not as speculation presented as fact, but as the kind of careful analysis this case deserves, because Nancy Guthrie's family is still out there, still waiting, still asking the same question everyone who has followed this story keeps asking. Who was the shadow on the porch? January 31st, 2026 was a Saturday. For Nancy Guthrie, it was a normal one. Her family describes her as mentally sharp and fully independent. Not a woman who needed watching over, but a woman who chose to stay connected. She had lived in the Tucson area for more than 50 years. She was active in her church. She was the kind of presence in a community that people notice the absence of. She did have health considerations. She took daily medication for a chronic condition. She had limited mobility. But these were managed ordinary facts of her life, not limitations that defined it. That Saturday evening, she took an Uber to her daughter's home for dinner, a family gathering, the kind of evening that becomes significant only in retrospect. She was there, she was present, she was, as far as anyone knew, fine. A little before 10 p.m., her son-in-law drove her home. He watched her go inside. He watched the garage door close behind her. Then he drove away. That was the last time any member of her family would see her. For the next several hours, as far as the public record shows, nothing happened. Nancy Guthrie was home. The night was quiet. The Catalina Foothills neighborhood, which sits at the edge of the Sonoran Desert north of Tucson, is not a place where things tend to happen after dark. Winding roads, desert brush, the particular silence of a wealthy, residential neighborhood at midnight. Then 1:47 a.m. Nancy Guthrie's Nest doorbell camera went offline. The shadow. What happened in the hours after 1:47 a.m. on February 1st is now partially reconstructed from data that investigators recovered after the fact. Because the person who came to Nancy Guthrie's door made a mistake, they took the camera. The physical device was gone when deputies arrived, but modern smart home cameras don't store footage only on the device. They sync to the cloud. And while the suspect had the hardware, They did not have Google's back-end servers. Working with Google Nest, FBI technicians recovered residual data, fragments of the footage and device activity logs that had been uploaded before the camera was disabled. What they reconstructed gave investigators and eventually the public a partial but significant picture. 1:47 a.m. The camera goes offline. Not a technical failure. Disconnected. Where 2:12 a.m. The system registers a motion event. This is when the recovered footage shows the figure. The FBI's official description: a male estimated between 5'9" and 5'10", average build, wearing a black mask, black gloves, carrying what appeared to be a handgun in a distinctive holster, and carrying a specific backpack, a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack, which the FBI identified by model and released publicly as a detail the investigation needed help with. To 2:28 a.m., Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker disconnects from her phone. 16 minutes. Whatever happened inside that house, it happened fast. Fast enough that no neighbor heard anything. Fast enough that no other alarm triggered, which investigators have noted could indicate the use of a Wi-Fi jammer, a device capable of disabling not just the doorbell, but cellular connected alarms and backup systems. The use of such a device would be illegal, and would also suggest a level of preparation that goes beyond opportunistic crime. The figure on the footage was methodical. The camera was taken, not just disabled. The physical device was removed, not because the suspect didn't know about cloud backup, but perhaps because they didn't know, or perhaps to slow investigators down, or perhaps for a reason we haven't identified. What we know is, by the time the sun came up over the Catalina Mountains on February 1st, Nancy Guthrie was gone. And the shadow on her porch had vanished with her. The investigation. The response was large. The Pima County Sheriff's Department, the FBI, and multiple federal agencies descended on the Catalina Foothills within hours of Nancy being reported missing. The house was treated as a major crime scene. Forensic teams worked the property systematically. The interior, the porch, the perimeter, the pool and patio, even the septic tank, and the neighborhood's winding roads and dense desert brush were canvassed on foot. Authorities put out a request for surveillance footage from every home and business within a 2-mile radius of Nancy's address, covering the window from midnight to dawn. The blood drops on the front porch, the first thing deputies had noticed, were processed by rapid DNA testing and confirmed to belong to Nancy. It was physical evidence placing the crime at that location, which mattered. And what it didn't do was point anywhere. On February 8th, a week after the disappearance, investigators conducted another extensive search of the property. The level of attention being paid to a single residence, a full week in, speaks to how little had been found elsewhere. The neighborhood offered almost nothing. No one had seen a vehicle. No one had heard anything unusual. In a neighborhood designed for privacy, winding roads, mature landscaping, when houses set back from the street, a person moving in the early hours of the morning, carefully, quietly, would have been almost invisible. And then, on February 15th, something changed. A black glove was found approximately 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home. Forensic analysis confirmed it visually matched the gloves worn by the suspect in the recovered footage. And when technicians processed it for DNA, they found a profile, an unknown male. Your investigators ran the profile against CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, which holds millions of offender profiles from across the country. No match, which tells us something. A CODIS miss doesn't mean the person has never been involved in crime. It means they have never been entered into that particular database, which typically requires a prior arrest or conviction in the United States. A person who had never been caught, or who had been caught only in a jurisdiction that hadn't contributed their profile, or who was not American, would produce exactly this result. Inside the house itself, forensic teams collected multiple mixed DNA samples from locations that didn't belong to Nancy or her close contacts. The challenge was separating individual profiles from genetic material that had been mixed together, a process that forensic experts publicly noted could take months. Multiple contributors, no matches. A suspect whose face was hidden and whose DNA was unknown. The investigation had a great deal of evidence. It had not yet produced a name. The ransom notes. While forensic work continued at the house, the case took a turn that complicated everything. Between February 3rd and 5th, several media outlets received cryptic ransom notes. The notes demanded payment in Bitcoin. They set deadlines. They purported to be from whoever had taken Nancy Guthrie. Investigators took the notes seriously, as they had to. When someone is missing and a ransom demand arrives, you follow it. You don't dismiss it on instinct, regardless of how it feels. But the deadlines passed. Nothing happened. No proof of life accompanied the demands. And investigators were never able to publicly confirm that any of the notes were authentic. Then came the arrest. A man from California was taken into custody for sending a fake ransom note in connection with the Guthrie case. A hoax. A person who, for reasons investigators have not fully explained publicly, decided to insert themselves into an active abduction case with a fabricated demand. The investigation had to determine whether his note was the fake and the others were real, or whether the entire ransom angle was a dead end. It consumed resources. It consumed time. In a case where every hour matters, that is not a small thing. I want to address something else here, because it's come up repeatedly in public discussion of this case, and it deserves a direct answer. Within days of Nancy's disappearance, some people online began speculating about her family's possible involvement. This is not unusual in high-profile missing persons cases. The internet applies the same logic as investigators do in the early stages, which is to look at the people closest to the victim first. But in this instance, the Pima County Sheriff's Department addressed it explicitly and publicly. Investigators stated that suggestions of family involvement were, in their words, not only wrong, they were cruel. The family was cleared. They have been cooperative throughout the investigation and have, by every public account, been living in the specific agony of not knowing. That line needs to stay clear. The family did not do this. Meanwhile, the public response to Nancy's disappearance was genuinely extraordinary. Over 24,000 tips poured into the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Department. National media picked up the story. The case was discussed across true crime communities, Reddit forums, Facebook groups. Thousands of people who had never heard of Nancy Guthrie 6 weeks ago now knew her face and her name. All of those tips had to be processed, each one evaluated, cross-referenced, followed up on where possible. It is, in an investigation like this, both an enormous asset and an enormous burden. So far, none of them have led to Nancy. What the evidence suggests. Let me try to do something useful here, which is to look at the physical evidence and the known facts of this case and ask what they actually suggest. Not what makes the best story, but what the details point toward when you look at them honestly. The first thing worth sitting with is the level of preparation. Whoever came to Nancy Guthrie's house that night came prepared. They wore a mask and gloves, standard precautions against identification and fingerprint evidence. They carried a firearm. They had a specific backpack. They disabled the camera. They were, by the timeline the data produced, in and out of that property in under 30 minutes. That is not the behavior of someone who decided that night to commit a crime. That is the behavior of someone who had already decided and had thought through at least the basics of how to do it. When the second thing worth noting is the target. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old, lived alone, took daily medication, and had limited mobility. She was, in the language investigators use when they don't want to be callous, but need to be precise, a vulnerable victim. Someone who would be difficult to overpower but easy to control, and who was unlikely to be able to flee or fight. Was this targeted? Was Nancy Guthrie chosen specifically? Or was she a target of opportunity? An elderly woman living alone in a neighborhood that made surveillance easy? I don't know. Investigators have not stated publicly one way or the other, and that ambiguity is itself significant. If they were confident it was a targeted attack, they would likely have said so. If they were confident it was random, the investigation would look different. The fact that both possibilities remain open suggests the evidence hasn't closed that question. The third thing, and this is the one I keep returning to, is the DNA from the glove. An unknown male profile, not in CODIS, recovered from evidence found 2 miles from the scene. That profile exists. It is, as of today, the best potential identifier investigators have of who did this. And this is where the most powerful tool currently in play comes in: genetic genealogy. The same technique used to identify Joseph James DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer, after decades of failed investigation. The process takes an unknown DNA profile and searches it against public genealogy databases, looking not for the suspect themselves, but for relatives who have voluntarily submitted their DNA. From a partial relative match, investigators can build a family tree, narrow down candidates by age and geography and opportunity, and eventually arrive at a name. It is painstaking. It can take months. It requires both scientific expertise and investigative patience. But it has worked before on cases that seemed unsolvable. Inside the house, the mixed DNA samples present a different challenge. Separating individual profiles from combined genetic material is technically complex, and experts who spoke publicly about the case warned that results could be months away. When the possibility that those samples represent multiple contributors, that the person on the porch did not act alone, has not been confirmed, but it has not been ruled out either. One more thing I want to address directly: the theory about a Wi-Fi jammer. No law enforcement agency has officially confirmed the use of a jammer in this case. What they have confirmed is that multiple connected devices in the home went offline in a compressed time frame. That is consistent with a jammer, but it is also consistent with a suspect who disabled devices sequentially, or with technical failures that happened to coincide. The jammer theory is credible and worth investigators' attention. It is not, as of this recording, established fact. There's one last question I want to raise, not because I have an answer, but because I think it's the right question to be asking. What was the motive? The ransom notes may have been fake. The Bitcoin demands may have been a hoax. If ransom was the actual goal, real ransom, from someone who believed Nancy's family had the means and motivation to pay, then why has there been no credible demand? Why no proof of life? Why, in the weeks since the abduction, no contact from whoever actually has her? Ransom requires communication. A kidnapper who wants money has to ask for it. The silence is either evidence that she was taken for a different reason, one we haven't identified, or it is evidence of something worse that I am not going to state as fact because it isn't proven. I don't know why Nancy Guthrie was taken. I don't think anyone outside that investigation does. Where the case stands. As of this recording, Nancy Guthrie has been missing for more than a month. The investigation is still active. The FBI has shifted from a large on-the-ground presence in Tucson to a long-term operational model run out of its Phoenix field office, which is standard procedure for an investigation that has moved past the initial search phase into sustained forensic and investigative work. Nancy's home has been returned to her family. Forensic analysis of the mixed DNA samples from inside the house is ongoing. Genetic genealogy work on the profile from the glove is ongoing. The 24,000 plus tips are being processed. Nancy's family has offered a $1 million cash reward for information leading to her safe return, in addition to the $100,000 reward from the FBI. Her children have made public statements. They have appeared on camera. They have done everything that a family in this situation is asked to do, and then more. They have not given up. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She takes daily medication. She has limited mobility. Those facts matter not as forensic details, but as human ones. Because wherever she is, she needs care that a masked figure in a backpack is not providing out of kindness. The family has said publicly that they believe she could be alive. They have asked for proof of life. They have asked anyone with any information, no matter how small, no matter how uncertain, to come forward. I want to be careful about how I end this, because this is not one of those cases that ends neatly. There is no moral question to leave you with. There is no philosophical ambiguity to sit in. There is a real woman missing from a real house and a family that goes to bed every night not knowing where she is. What I can offer is this. The physical evidence in this case is not nothing. A DNA profile from a glove, mixed samples from inside the house, a specific backpack model that someone, somewhere has seen, a timeline that tells investigators almost exactly when this happened, even if it doesn't yet tell them who. Cases like this have been solved by one person recognizing one detail, a backpack, a vehicle, a person who was somewhere they shouldn't have been on a night they can't quite explain. The Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI are still actively seeking tips. The tip line is open, the reward is real, and the family is still waiting. If you have seen anything, if you recognize the Ozark Trail backpack, if you know someone who was in the Catalina Foothills area in the early hours of February 1st, if something about this case connects to something you know, the number to call is the Pima County Sheriff's Department tip line, and every detail matters. Somewhere in that desert city, a shadow knows where Nancy Guthrie is. We just haven't found the right person to recognize it yet. If this case stayed with you, please like the video so more people see it. Comment with your thoughts or any detail that stood out and share it. Awareness matters in cases like this. And if you want careful, fact-driven coverage of stories that still need answers, subscribe for more.